Welcome to the Sculpture School podcast. I'm Diane Sinclair and I'm a director at the Sculpture School.
I'm Andrew Sinclair. I'm the main sculptor and I'm also a director at the Sculpture School and do most of the teaching as well.
My name's Lindsey Joanne Bauer and I'm the creative arts executive at the Sculpture School. And I'm also studying a history PhD at Bristol University. And I might mention that a bit. So, yeah, I'm just going to say that now.
Yeah, well said, darling.
So we're so excited to be doing our first ever Sculpture School podcast. And I think it's really important that we kind of set out some background about the Sculpture School, about who we are, what we love about sculpture and art. So who would like to kick off?
I think Andy needs to, as he's the main tutor.
Well, the Sculpture School is both myself and Diane's baby, really. Yeah. It's about the ethos behind creative sculpture that is seen as a skill base or a talent that we can nurture and bring out in people. We're incredibly passionate about it, and that's why we're doing this podcast, because we feel that we're not presenting ourselves with a real face. All you get is the website and so on. Yeah. And I just think it's a lovely way of for people who are following us to be able to see us as people and understand exactly what we're doing.
So talk me through. Before we get to that, Di, tell me a little bit about you as well, because you don't just, you sculpt, don't you? But you also paint. So do you want to tell me a little bit about...
And she plays the drums. It's sickening, really.
I'm a rock
go on. You are a rock chip. Yeah. You'll be zipping out in a minute to join a Fleetwood Mac tribute band. No, go for it. Tell us about you.
Well, I don't know where to start, actually. In my latter years, I have become more of a sculptor and a painter. I was meant to go to art school when I left school at 18, but I didn't think I was weird enough or freaky enough to go. And so I opted to become a nurse, which was a bit bizarre at the time and shocked my parents terribly. But actually, it was probably the right thing for me at the time. Yeah. But art has always been really important, and I've always painted or sketched. I love drawing people and painting people. So even when I was a nurse, I was producing cartoons and paintings of for balls and things like that. And then after I was married and my children were old enough to have go to childcare, I started doing watercolor classes and painting. And developed a good skill at that and started to sell my paintings.
Oh, wow.
Which was great. Yeah, and then when I was, when the boys were then older, I was able to go to art school. There became a point where I either had to go to work or I had to study. I was, I'd done enough of the parent-teacher association thing. Really needed to become the artist I felt I was meant to be. Yeah. So went to art school wanting to learn more about painting and more about sculpting, but wanting to learn to sculpt. And I had 3 years playing around with lots of different materials, but I learned nothing about sculpture. Okay. And there was nobody at art school who could teach me the skills. And it wasn't until I met Andy that I really learnt to sculpt. There's more to that later, but I learnt more in 3 months working with Andy than I did in 3 years at art college. And so I've then sort of become a sculptor and a painter. But most of my time now is spent marketing and promoting the school, and which I love. But I'm desperate to get back to doing a bit more of my own artwork.
That's the thing. I think when you're creative, and that's what fuels you and fires you up and makes you excited about life. But then, when you do anything that's creative, there's also all the admin and all the associated work that goes with it. And sometimes that can sort of almost take over your time when you want to be creative, can't it? Yeah. So it's trying to make time for everything. Otherwise, your creative soul kind of dies, doesn't it?
Well, we're very lucky to be able to work in doing something that we love.
Yeah.
That's that's a really important part of it.
Yeah, most definitely. I think we're very privileged, but it is nice to be talking like this, because I think people think that artists quaff wine and talk about esoteric subjects and have a lovely time. But in fact, of course, we're running a business like anybody else is. Yeah. And the pressures of that and the restrictions that you're certainly feeling are part of our everyday lives.
Yeah, and we're going to go into more depth about, what it's like to run a sculpture school, what's involved, all of that, more about your background in a minute, Andy, as well. But first of all, let's just quickly, for most people listening to this, watching this, will have an interest in sculpture anyway. But some people will stumble across our podcast and kind of want to know more about why sculpture is so important, like why art's important, but why sculpture particularly is important for us. So perhaps we can just all quickly say what we love about sculpture.
I always feel that sculpture is the least important of the arts, because painting and printing and all the other arts get more coverage than sculpture. And what is interesting about it is that if you see a sculpture, or a sculpture is put up in public, it's a sculpture of whoever it might be. It's never a sculpture by. And that is indicative of the state of sculpture. I think it's always been that way. And I've been desperate to try and change that, because a painting is always a painting by somebody. A book is always written. The author is so-and-so. It's important to say so. It makes you sound more educated. But with sculpture, it's the reverse is true. And so I feel like I'm fighting the cause for sculptors to be taken more seriously, actually. I think it's because of the practicality of it as well. A sculpture has to be put somewhere, whereas a painting is hung on the wall. Everybody knows that. And it's a kind of psychological ease that comes with that isn't there with sculpture. So it is an interesting phenomena. But my passion has always been sculpture. Ever since I was little, I hated plasticine. I wanted clay. And I was making things. My father used to give me copper wire, because he was a silversmith. And he had stuff like that. So those were the things that I played with, and those are the things that I made. And I think looking back on it, but I didn't know it at the time, it just created this passion and this ability to use multimedia.
I was talking to Louis, who was one of our alumni students from the sculpture school recently in Florence, and he was saying something quite similar, actually, that when he was little, he loved playing with blue tack and things like that, and creating little sculptures out of that. So I think, for some people from the word go, you sort of want something tangible that you can create something with, can't you?
And you even used to dig up the clay, didn't you? From near where you lived. You used to go
down in the woods, there was a little wall of clay, and I think the sewer emptied out over there as well, so it didn't smell very nice. But the fact that I survived that and happily played with that and made things all the time. That, as I say, but you don't know it at the time. It's interesting how you don't know what's going on in your life at the time. You can only see it in retrospect.
And you realise you followed a journey without kind of necessarily being aware of that. And for you, Di, what makes you feel that sculpture is so important, and what does it say to you?
I think it's the fact that it's a physical reality that you can touch. And there's something very, very sensuous about being able to touch and feel a sculpture. Actually, I always want to touch paintings as well, but you're not allowed. Whereas with a sculpture, particularly when I'm sculpting, I want to create that sense of sensuality and emotion and the feeling of real muscles. It's a beauty. It's beautiful. It's harder to place for people, I think. Buying sculptures is much harder than buying a painting. But there's something, I think it's really important, and it's a forgotten art. And that's what we're about, really, is promoting the skills so that they don't get lost. For you, it's about creating a legacy, isn't it? Of your, to make sure that professional sculpture skills don't get lost to the future, really.
Because I think what I really love about sculpture, and I've been thinking about this quite a lot in preparation for our podcast, but is the way, like, the sort of tactility of it. So like you were saying, Di, like, you can touch it. It's 3D, isn't it? But also for sculptors, in the process of making sculptures, the fact that you are hands-on, aren't you? And hands-on, like, really physically, like if you're working with clay and things, in a way that's different to if you're a painter, for example. But also, like, the other aspect I really like about sculpture is it's so reflective of so many different states of mind. So like some of the sculptures we're going to talk about later, they might be to commemorate someone, they might be to capture somebody's likeness at a moment in time, perhaps, you know, somebody that's loved. They might be to say a political message. There's all kinds of different meanings behind sculpture. And because I really like stories and like human stories, that's what I love about sculpture. It's like, what is the story behind this sculpture? It's a bit like if you see someone with a tattoo, like I instantly think, what's the story behind that tattoo? Does it have a story behind it? And that's the same with sculpture. They all tell a story of some kind, and we have to work out what it is.
No, I'm particularly passionate about that. I think, to me, sculpture is all about narrative. It's not about the great and the good standing on a plinth. So I weave a story into what I'm doing, and I find that really exciting. In fact, it's got to a point where it's almost got ridiculous. The latest sculpture I'm doing, I think I'll never be able to show anybody. It's got so ridiculous. But it is what I find exciting, and it is a personal journey. All of this is a personal journey. It's not something that's fixed, and you can only do it this way.
One of the questions I was going to ask you, but we'll come back to you later because we want to talk about the sculpture school in a second, but is about that whole idea of how you represent someone as well. And I'm when I first came to the sculpture school, so I came as an art model to model for you. Andy does an incredible lecture featuring the 34 most important muscles of the human body for any sculptors who are sculpting the human body to know, like, what they need to focus on. And so that's how I got to meet Andy and Di. And I'm really interested in portrayals of humans and, you know, animals too, and like what you decide to leave in and what you decide to leave out. So that goes back to the stories that we tell in our sculptures. But we'll park that for a minute because I feel that we should get back into like more of a background into how the sculpture school came into being and a little bit more about you two. So we've established your interest and your love of art and sculpture. But what about, like, how did you both meet and how did you start the foundation for the sculpture school?
Well, my background, I started out as a cabinet maker, really. I think that was my first business. And in fact, it's still true now. If I'm making anything, I get into it and I love it, whether it's making a table or a cupboard or making a beautiful sculpture. To me, it's all the same thing. So for me, it was a natural progression to go from cabinet making into sculpture. Seemed obvious at the time. Looking back on it, there's nothing obvious about it at all. It was a very strange ability that and also I was young. I felt that I was a jack of all trades and master of none. So therefore, if I could do it, anyone could do it. The reality of it, of course, as I got older, is that that really isn't so, particularly now that I'm teaching, and I love passing that on. But you can see some people really struggling with the concepts that to me seem very natural. So when my business folded as a cabinet maker, I went through a short period where I was a dispatch rider in London, and I felt trapped. I felt that I couldn't get out of the situation I was in because I'm well educated, but no real qualifications that really mean anything. My education finished at about 16, 17, really, because of things happening at home. So I found myself in a situation where I couldn't convince a potential employer of my potential. I think that was what was missing. And then one day on the way into London, it was really horrible. It was wintertime. I was freezing cold. It was raining and I was really down. It was a low point. I suddenly thought, I did a foundation course in Bournemouth to see what I wanted to specialize in as far as a degree was concerned. I really had it with education by that time. I really couldn't bear the institution or anything else. So I had to leave. But I did do a course on a Wednesday evening for 3 weeks doing a portrait.
Okay.
And I got a really good portrait of the person I was doing the portrait of. And it was that memory, some 13 years later, maybe more, 16 years later, that struck me on the way into London that day. I thought, I don't know what to do. I'll be a portrait sculptor. As simple as that. Yeah. And from that spurious and incredibly unlikely decision, very quickly came the my own studio, creating sculptures. And it happened through a tremendous accident. I don't know how I survived it or how I got through it, but I hit a car side on at 60 miles an hour, just pulled that in front of me. And it was a sort of apocalyptic.
It's an epiphany.
Maybe both.
It's good job we got Diane here to put the right one. I can't think of the right word. It was an epiphany.
It's a like when you see those cartoons and someone's lying there, kind of like stars, things are like little birds.
So I feel safe with Diane next to me. If I get my words wrong, she just gets me right. It's like that at breakfast in the morning.
So you had that kind of epiphany moment.
Yeah. Well, the accident was so significant. The motorbike ended up about 3 feet long. Yeah. The car was written off. The roof was taken off. The chassis was bent. Yeah. And nobody was hurt miraculously, but I really wasn't hurt. Yeah. I just didn't have a bruise or a scratch on me.
Miracle.
And I got quite a lot of compensation for that. So I used the money to build a studio in my garden, get 6 portrait sculptors together, because I thought naively that you can make a living doing that. Quite patently, obviously, you cannot make a living doing that.
That's what I like about the, not arrogance of youth, but the confidence of youth, isn't it?
Because you naivety, feel, I think.
And it's like no one wants to dent that, because that's really important. And sometimes as we get older, we sort of like lose that extra optimism of being that age. I think as we get older, it's that balance, isn't it, between like that kind of sense of I can achieve literally anything, and actually like, how am I going to make that happen? Like I can do it, but how am I going to make it do it? Yeah. How am I going to do it? But you obviously did create a successful business, but how did you go from?
Well, the interesting thing was I thought I could do all of this independently. You're talking about the arrogance of youth. I thought I didn't need to be helped in this. I thought I could do it all anyway. Just came naturally. Interestingly, on that aspect of it scared me slightly that what happens if I woke up one day and couldn't do any of this, because I didn't know how I did it. I just could. But anyway, it's interesting looking backwards in time, because you can see things that you simply can't see when it's happening around you. It's chaotic when it's happening around you. But I met a guy who was running a molding and casting business, and he offered me a job. I didn't want to take it. I thought I could be independent. But I'm really pleased I did take it. Actually, a friend of mine said, well, you'd be stupid not to.
Can I just jump in there? For anyone who's not aware of what moulding and casting is, can you just give us a really brief description of what that involves?
It's a business that creates tooling to be able to produce a finished sculpture.
Okay.
Which is quite important. Certainly at that time around London, there were a lot of sculpture classes going on. And we used to go around picking up sculptures from sculpture classes that were clays, bringing them back to the studio and processing them into resin bronzes. That's what we were doing. That was the business. And I worked there for 7 years. So it was, and I look back on it now as an apprenticeship. It was an amazing period to be able to learn skills fast that were needed to be able to do what I do now. I was making literally hundreds of molds, dealing with very difficult situations where armatures, which is the core of the sculpture, were badly made, so that any extra weight on top of it would have destroyed the sculpture completely. So a lot of thinking outside of the box in order to be able to make the practical and technical side of sculpture work.
I was going to say it's like a baptism of fire, and then obviously that's quite apt.
And I was so passionate about it that I did really well there. I became the workshop manager, and everything was going very well. And then we started getting sculptures through.
And at that point, did you have a young family, or did that come later? Or
yeah, no, I definitely had a young family at that point.
Sorry, go on. No, you go.
No, I was going to say I was hedging my bets on all this. not only was I working at the Wellington casting studio, but I was also training to become a massage therapist, which was a very important part of the whole thing, because my passion and love for anatomy was really forged through that those decisions, really. So that I was getting, I had over 100 clients at one point.
Just say to listeners, like, why did you, like, I know why you were a masseur as well, a massage therapist, but why did you do that? So you've got a young family, you're also an apprentice, working as an apprentice at this moulding and casting business, but you've also become a massage therapist. Why did you do that?
It was just to put food on the table. It was all about the practicalities of making money. I'd made a decision which, looking back on it, was absolutely insane. And I had to be able to provide for the family. Absolutely had to.
So it stays precious.
It was precious. So I was hedging my bets, getting enough incomes coming through to be able to forge my way forwards in what I really loved, which was the sculptural side of it.
So that, I think that's quite an interesting kind of like words of encouragement for anyone listening to this who's maybe doing, a day job, and I've met so many people that have come to the sculpture school who are like architects or like doctors, or, they're working in IT or all of these different sectors. And they're like, you know what, like when I was younger, I really loved art, but my parents were like, you need to go to medical school, or you need to do this.
Do a job.
Yeah, you need to do like a proper job. And so like they have to drop their passion, and then they're just frustrated artists later because, not there's anything wrong with those professions, but it's just like you have that inner fire burning away, like you so want to do something and you feel that this creative side of you is unfulfilled. So it's like, I think your example, Andy, is just brilliant in the sense that you did something sort of practically with sort of massage therapy with your clients, but also that sort of helped, bring in a regular income, but also like that gave you extra anatomical knowledge of the body, which you've been able to use as a sculptor, and ultimately it's enabled you to become the sculptor you are today. So where there's a will, there's a way, certainly, isn't there?
Always so. And one of the first sculptures that came through the studio, the modern casting studio, was for classical figures. And whilst I was sculpting them as life-size figures, I knew I had to learn my anatomy. And it makes me more empathetic towards my students, because I knew I had to do my anatomy. I knew I had to learn it, because it's no good copying. Copying, it gets you so far. But the important thing was that the massage forced me to learn my anatomy. I couldn't pass my ITEC exam without anatomy, so I had to do that. And it gave me that springboard that has become so important now. What's interesting about the anatomy side of things is that from a sculptural point of view, we only need to know what I call the essential 34 muscles. In mammals, not just us, mammals per se, there is approximately 600 muscles. So out of those 600, you only really need to learn the 34. And despite that very small number of muscles you need to learn, it's kept me fascinated and learning for the last 30 years. And I think that's incredible.
And every time when you run a course, you learn something new as well, don't you? It never stops. Every time there's a course, there's something new. Then Andrew will say, God, you never know what I just realised today.
No, I have to say that, for listeners, I've heard Andy's 34 muscles talk probably about 6 times now. And every time I hear it, it's like fascinating. So again, I always learn something new. And like everyone, you should definitely come to the sculpture school and do a course, even if it's only to simply hear Andy's talk about the 34 muscles of the human body. Because even if you're not a sculptor, it's just a fascinating lecture that helps you appreciate your human body, doesn't it? And all the brilliant things that you can do.
It's actually online as well. We sell it. We sell it on our website as an anatomy resource.
Standalone.
So it's available.
It's something worth watching, really.
It's definitely worth watching.
No, it's incredible. And what we're going to do is in some later podcast, and demo of maybe a couple of the muscles and tell us what they are and who's going to draw them on me or on Di or some other willing victim. So and then you'll get like a little glimpse of Andy's knowledge about some of these muscles. But no, that's fascinating, Andy. And so if we move on to like Di, when did you meet Andy, and how did you gradually, if we're working towards telling the listeners about the sculpture school? So
well, we met I after I'd finished art school and I'd graduated. I had joined a cooperative group of sculptors in Sunninghill.
Okay.
And I was working there, and I was sort of learning to sculpt through them, really.
Yeah.
And Andy was still running his moulding and casting business, and he actually came to the studio I was working, and you were doing a mould, a life-size piece, I think, when we met. And I then actually got a commission for a life-size sculpture myself.
Right. Okay.
And I didn't have a clue where to start, actually.
I'm going to say, it must be really scary, like trying to put together a huge not huge, but a life-size sculpture, because it's like, if you're working in something that's quite small, you can you have the overview, don't you? When it's like life-size, you haven't got that kind of overview, have you?
No, and also I'd been making kind of tabletop size sculptures, and I really, really didn't know where to start.
Yeah.
So I made the armature and stuff, but it was a laying down figure, so a reclining figure.
Yeah.
So that was harder as well, actually, to get all the perspectives and the muscles correctly.
Yeah.
So I was asking Andy, how do I do this? And what do I, how do I go about it? So he taught me quite a lot of really basic things right at the very beginning. And then he helped me find a foundry, and you talked me through the whole process, really. And I wouldn't have been able to create that sculpture without his help. And we became friends through that, didn't we? And we were friends for quite a few years, really. And Andy invited me. Andy was still had a lot of work coming through for cruise liners. We'll talk about later. But he had a lot of commercial contracts, and asked me if I'd be interested in going to work on some of the pieces for him, which for me was a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And I was quite excited. I thought, I'm a real sculptor now.
It's a bit like, because I always think of, I know it's slightly different, but in Ghost with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore, and like that whole, like, it's quite sensuous, isn't it? Like when they're working, like she's at a potter's wheel, I think, and she's like making her like pot, and he's like behind her. And I think it's that whole process of when you're doing something creative, and it's like, working with someone else that you clearly get on with without going into any details.
It was in the days when we could wear dungarees without a lot on underneath, and so you could admire someone's muscles or their suntan.
Yeah. No, that sounds. I'm not sure where to go with this.
So anyway, he invited me to work on these contracts, and it was a Venetian mask.
Oh, cool.
We were doing,
you
can see down the drive when you come to the sculpture school.
Yeah.
And I'd never worked on anything so big, and I didn't understand the techniques on how to get a beautiful curve.
Yeah.
So I learned so much through doing that with Andy. And then we worked on some tropical birds, and there was a whole load of cruise liner contracts that Andy had. And we were sitting in a pub garden at lunchtime, or one evening after work, and I just said, we ought to set up a sculpture school because you're such an amazing teacher. And I had really, as I said before, I had learnt more in the 3 months than I did in 3 years at university. And I hadn't a clue what was involved from once you start, putting the clay on the armature to actually creating something solid that people could buy. I didn't have a clue.
And that resonates with quite a few people I've spoken to who've been to the sculpture school after having studied like fine art or something somewhere else, and they thought that they would learn sculpture at these other institutions. A guy that I spoke to quite recently, and he's now an alumni of the sculpture school, that he went to study, I won't name the institution, but a university, and it was fine arts, and an element of that was meant to be sculpture. And he just said it was like so dissatisfying because he like there wasn't any depth covered in the sculpture aspect of the course, and you were kind of left floundering. And so like he realized he needed to come to something very specific that was very tailored towards sculpture. And sculpture school, your sculpture school, was the only venue that he could find, training school, that specifically deals with sculpture and the sort of methodology and the depth that you do. Now he's having a really successful sculpting career. So yeah, like what you offer at the sculpture school is so unique, isn't it?
It's all about teaching people to be able to run their own business.
Yeah.
To me, a qualification is fine. It's great.
Yeah.
But in my life, because of the way things turned out, that simply was not an option.
Yeah.
And so I learnt from the shop floor upwards. And actually, if you look back in history to all of the sculptors, they all were apprentices. They all started out as the general dog's body and worked their way up from the shop floor. And to me, the best people almost in any sphere do it that way, not through qualification. And to me, degrees are for doctors and lawyers. They're not the business of artists. Artists do not need degrees. In fact, it gives people a very bad attitude, an arrogant attitude. What you really need to be able to do is understand the concept of what your job is all about and be able to create it yourself without the need for relying on other people to make your armatures for you, to make your own molds, to make your own casts and so on. Even if that doesn't interest you, still having a good working knowledge makes you humble. It makes you understand what a molder and caster who's doing that for a living is going through, and the things that they have to do in order to make things work.
I think that's so important. I think it's like that element of like humility is like just so important in any aspect of life, isn't it? It's really good, like, just like taking it outside of the sculpture school for a second, like anyone who's been a waiter or something like that, those kind of like
Absolutely.
Those skills that you learn doing something like that, come in so useful later on in life. And as you say, Andy, like when you've been an apprentice and you've had to do like the hard graft or, like I was in the hairdressers yesterday and you've got like the girl who's sweeping up the floor and all of those things, go to form the whole person. So when you come to sort of launch your business, you're aware of, all of those processes, what needs to be done, how that person might feel, like the importance of supporting them, offering opportunities and things. It just makes you a far better, sculptor, employer, all of those things. How did you, if we go back a bit more to the sort of beginnings of the sculpture school, so Di, you had this idea when you're at the pub, and I think I'm right in thinking at that stage, like you were both free to sort of meet and like become a couple, is that right?
And both of our relationships were coming to the end. We both had very long relationships. Married for 28 years or whatever, but they were coming to a natural end. And we were at a point where
cute. And like your children then, were they sort of slightly older then, so it was easier for you to because also we want to encourage people who are listening to this who have young families, as we said before, that it is possible to combine your love of art and doing something creative. Well, like art can be like writing music content or writing books or whatever happens to sort of grab you if you're a creative person, but you don't have to like park it forever. If you love being creative, you can still keep that going when you have a young family. But obviously it's easier to get sort of fully immersed in your creative love and particularly for work when your children are a little bit older. But don't let that deter you if your children are young.
I was thinking that going back to the formation of the school itself is that one of the downsides of art. I think it's all art, whether you're a musician, painter, sculptor, actors, you have down periods. And they're not nice. They're very difficult to deal with. I still find it difficult to deal with now, actually. And it's part of that negative side of running your own business is the fact that there isn't a secure income. And with sculpture, particularly at the time, it's a roller coaster. It's up and down. It's great when money comes in. It's really not great when there's no money there at all. It's very frightening. And that was part of the reason that we had this conversation in the pub, was to find a way forwards that would give us a more secure income. I didn't want to teach at all. I really didn't at the time.
You were quite
that
handy,
sounds
weren't you?
crazy though, because you're such a good teacher. Like you are.
That then.
I would just say that as I'm like a fellow teacher to a fellow teacher. No, you're like a natural teacher, and all the students, for those listening, like Andy is extremely encouraging and enthusiastic and warm and helpful with all of the students. And so at the sculpture school, we have students coming who come from a completely different background, who've never ever touched clay, sculpture, who aren't artistic, but just love the idea of it. And literally anyone can learn to sculpt with Andy. So you don't have to have any background knowledge.
And whilst we're on that subject, it's actually an advantage to come to the school with no knowledge. Because then we don't have to clear away the bad habits.
Yes, a lot of people.
And bad habits are so hard to get rid of. And sculptors slip back into them very, very quickly. I mean, it's totally counterintuitive to create sculpture without copying. So you don't copy. If you copy, you can only hope to copy better next time. Well, that's not a good enough foundation in order to be able to move yourself on. So people that work entirely by copying stay at the same level, which I think is a tragedy, because they're talented like anybody else is within their sphere of passion. But it leaves you with no room for expansion. Whereas if you learn the foundations behind it, anatomy is much more complicated than you think it is. It's not just about muscle and bone. It's about design criteria, which is how muscles fit together. It's about rules of thumb, which are generally true, which increase your observation skills. There's so many aspects. Rhythm is another part that I think is incredibly important, which, as these podcasts hopefully proliferate, it will be able to explain in more depth. So the anatomy itself is really complex, and to be able to, what I call, put it into gear, because it's one thing knowing your anatomy academically, it's quite another being able to apply it to a piece of clay and make that piece of clay look like something, and it comes alive. And that's what's so exciting. And 30 odd years down the line, I'm more excited about it now than I was when I started the business. It's very, very fulfilling. And I think giving vent to your creativity, whatever that might be, and it is about creativity. Sculpture is an aspect to creativity. It could be anything, could be music, but whatever it is. And I've talked to musicians, they feel exactly the same way that I do. It's just that the subject matter is different. That's all there is to it. And I think the analogy between music and sculpture is incredibly powerful.
I was just going to say, and for people listening, I think it's just so important to say, whatever your passion is, like creative wise, then make sure you carve out some time to pursue it. And that could be like coming to the sculpture school, doing like our 1-day taster course or our 4-day standalone courses, and just like immersing yourself in like forgetting the outside world, switching off your phone, and just having a go at having a piece of clay, being shown by Andy what to do, and just like coming away at the end of it with something tangible, a proper little sculpture that you can be so proud of, and it could be the journey of something new.
It's an interesting phenomena that I never saw coming, is that I thought I was teaching this as a practical thing. There's an element of this which is partly technician, which is what I was when I started out. I started out as a technician, learning all these rules and principles and how to do things best. But there's this other element to it that the students certainly feel and certainly tell us about, which is a much more spiritual element. It's about that release of being able to immerse yourself in that creativity and have that time to be able to do it, and the excitement that comes with it. It's profoundly moving. And I didn't see that happening. I thought that I was just giving information, and I want to give that information because I feel that I've been incredibly lucky during my career to have, by happen chance, had an apprenticeship, which is impossible to get these days, to be able to have that unfettered time to be able to dedicate myself to this totally, and then to happen upon teaching, because the teaching, I think, my most unexpected student has been me, because I have to repeat things over and over and over again. And it's that makes me learn all the time. It's why I always learn something new. On the last course, we had a vet in, and a very good vet too. And she specializes in horses. So immediately my knowledge of horses went up. Because I'm not an expert in these things. I know what I need to know in order to be able to create a beautiful sculpture of a horse. But then there's all sorts of things that go with it, like conformation and little rules that apply to conformation that only somebody who's living and breathing horses would know.
So she's got all the nuances of horses, anatomy and everything that she could bring to you.
And I do think it's vital, no matter how many years down the road you are, to know that you don't know it, or you've just got to learn to learn.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
Yeah, and it's also for potential students, you're never too old.
No, that's such a good point.
It really doesn't matter. You can still keep learning.
Yeah.
And you can have a great time and reinvigorate your
definitely.
life,
A renaissance.
by learning something new.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's really important. And going back to what Andy was saying about the sort of meditative side of sculpting, which we hadn't anticipated. So many of our students say that when they come, and particularly when they do a 4-day course, it's like going on a retreat. That they're sort of welcomed into this warm place that's inspirational, but they're away from their everyday life. And it's a digital detox. The Wi-Fi is not brilliant. And we make them switch their phones off so that they can pay attention to Andy. But it is a retreat from real life.
I wanted to ask you more about the sculpture school and to share with people listening exactly what a special place it is. So if I can just say, the first time I came to the sculpture school, so that was just to meet Andy and Di for the first time. And I feel like now we've got a lovely alchemy between us all, haven't we? We just clicked instantly. When I first came to the sculpture school, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. I was just given the details of Andy and Di because I was doing art modelling to support my PhD. And because I absolutely love art. And came to the sculpture school, and it's this huge structure. It's in the middle of the Devon countryside, surrounded by beautiful fields. There's alpacas, and as I drove down your lane, and there's so I'm a massive fan of Albrecht Dürer from the 15th century, and as I drove down the lane, there's a replica sculpture of Dürer's rhinoceros. That's correct, isn't it? And I love that because Dürer created this without ever actually having seen a rhino in real life back at that time. And so there was something of history that I love that Andy had recreated in his garden. And I was like, this is crazy. So random. I wasn't expecting that. And then I walked into the sculpture studio, and this is such a beautiful space. It's so light and bright, and you've got plants everywhere, beautiful bronze sculptures everywhere of all kinds of different things on different sized plinths. There was a drum kit, there were people, it was buzzy, it had the loveliest atmosphere. And so it's just before you even start to sculpt or put your hands on clay, just that atmosphere, you feel like you're in a completely different world. It's like a bubble of creativity. It's just so lovely. So tell me a little bit more from your perspective about the sculpture school.
Well, actually, we the studio that we have, it's evolved, didn't it? It wasn't. We never, when we first arrived, there was nothing there. So we created the building, and everything that's in it has evolved through our own imagination and over time, hasn't it? And we feel so incredibly privileged to have been able to create that. And it's become our own space to relax in our playground. It's such a privilege to have that and to have created the beautiful grounds as well. We planted 1,500 trees and created out of horse paddocks something that's really lovely to behold. And that's not what we expected.
No,
was it? It was just
being artists. Money's always a problem.
Yeah.
And so at best, we thought we'd make these buildings into a kind of shabby chic sort of make, do, and mend. But sadly, because of my cabinet making background, shabby chic just isn't in my blood at all. So whatever I make tends to end up being, sort of perfectionist. It's something that I have to keep under control.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, actually. When I was a cabinet maker, I was working with a very good friend of mine, and we used to talk all the time, actually. One of the things that we used to talk about was keeping perfectionism under control so that you get the best from it without becoming totally anally retentive and grumpy.
And now it's my job to keep that under
control. No, it's my job.
That's why you make a dream team. All right, I think we're probably coming to the time where we need to wrap up this first episode. But before we do, we're all going to talk about a sculptor that we particularly like. And also you've got a beautiful sculpture here behind us. So who wants to go first? And also we're going to have some pictures that come up on the screen behind us.
Shall we go with Andy first?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us about your sculpture.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, talk about what I like, because part of it is about inspiration. And as my career has developed, I have been inspired by quite a few sculptors, contemporary sculptors. I love classical art, and I know a reasonable amount about classical art. And I love the fact that in Italy that heritage carries on in their teaching. But to me, we live now in the 21st century, and it is about current thinking and current art. So everything about what I teach, although it has a classical background to it and a heritage, it is about creating what is inside of you. So it's not restrained by rules. And that's led to me being inspired by all sorts of artists as I've grown into my career. People like Richard McDonald, for example, an American artist who's incredibly successful and is famous for his sculptures of the Cirque du Soleil teams throughout the world. He's really inspired me. I think when I saw his work in Miami, when I went over there to try and get some work off the cruise line companies, that I was blown away by what he was doing. But as you get older, as your talent matures as well, things change. And so I've chosen a couple of pieces that I really like because, partly because of the artists themselves behind it.
Right.
And when you ask me to find an art or a piece of work that particularly inspired me, it's fluid, it's transitory. It depends on where I'm at any particular time. But I've chosen this sculpture of the Bomber Command that Philip Jackson created because Philip Jackson was one of the people that really inspired me right from the word go.
What was it particularly about him that really stood out for you?
It was about the cleverness of what he does. He does gallery work and he does commission work. And his commission work to me was what really made me interested. To me, I wanted to be a commission artist. And I'm glad I was, actually. I tried to get into the film industry. I've tried all sorts of different avenues, but all of them were blocked to me. And it forced me into the career that I've created, which is doing work for people that they want to see happen. So I've been a sculptor creating fire-breathing dragons with laser beams for eyes for nightclubs.
Cool.
Right through to beautiful classical sculptures, right through to my own big pieces that have gone out into city centres and so on.
I love at the sculpture school, you've got these huge big doors, haven't you? And you've got a beautiful bronze figure. It's just the face of a lion. I think because I go to Venice a lot for my PhD, and obviously the lion figure over there looms everywhere. And so, like, just seeing that, I love that, because it's classical, it's beautiful, and it's such a symbol of power and strength. But I know that you've got an incredible sculpture of David Bowie, haven't you? So you've got like the whole range.
Yeah, and it's that range that's really, I feel really privileged, because it's happened chance.
Yeah.
I didn't manipulate things to happen like this.
Yeah.
It's all about my passion in wanting to be like Philip Jackson, I think, where you're doing these fantastic, huge monuments that go, that are there for the public to admire. What I love about the way that he's worked in the past is that he's a consummate, brilliant expert at it. Everything that he does and touches is beautifully seen. His curves are fantastic. His ability to reproduce cloth is second to none. Yeah, and I found that incredibly inspiring.
Those techniques require such skill, don't they? And I know that in later episodes we're going to talk about things like dynamic curves and the golden mean and all of these different techniques or aspects of sort of knowledge that you need to create a beautiful sculpture. But yeah, and Andy, in a minute we'll come back to just talk about your beautiful sculpture behind you that you made. Di, what sculpture does everything for you? It's the spot, whatever you want to say.
Going on here. I have actually chosen Andy's sculpture of the Duke of Wellington's Regiment Memorial, which is in Halifax.
And it won an award.
It won the Halifax Civic Trust Award. I think Andy is equally as good as Philip Jackson in terms of the detail, the movement of the cloth, the sense of history that he's evoked in all the different characters, and the way that the story is woven through the whole sculpture. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and it's so unusual for a military sculpture. It even features a World War II mum with her two children, and the little girl is holding a teddy bear. And you'll never ever see that in a military sculpture. And I suppose because I was involved in helping Andy in the whole process of the commission and helping with some of the sculpting as well. To me, it's very personal as being a fantastic work of art, but also it's receiving accolades from the public, and the public in Halifax absolutely adore it, and it's become a memorial, a place to meet. It's where they celebrate Remembrance Day and lots of other military occasions. But it's just the sheer skill that's involved in that piece.
I love it because, currently at the moment for my PhD, I'm writing about resilience and resilience back in history. And that's meant that I've had to look at some historical studies. And most of the studies of resilience in history are all focused on war. So how soldiers coped with the trenches in World War I, Britain during the Blitz in World War II. And other sort of main wars. And their resilience, 'cause all of them were particularly resilient, how they sort of rebuilt their lives, coped with all of that extreme stress. We talk about anxiety today, but the anxiety that they all face in different times. And I think you really I'm looking at this sculpture from a perspective of looking at their resilience and the figures, and it really comes out, they're sort of determined faces.
And it's 300 years of their history, 300 years of families
affected,
going through the traumas of war.
Not just the soldiers, but their families too. But also kind of being stoical, the figure at the back, stoical and just kind of has he got a pipe, Andy, or
the one standing to our right? Yeah, they all smoke actually.
So they did, didn't they?
Yeah,
coping strategy.
But to me, it's all about a kind of hidden narrative as much as anything else. So the more you know about the narrative, the more you get drawn into the sculpture, whether figurative sculpture is your thing or not. It still has a fascinating story behind it.
You can go back to that sculpture and look at it over and over again and find something new. There's so many different aspects to it.
And that ties in with what we said at the outset about sculptures telling a story. Like there's always a story behind them, isn't it? Whether it's from the person who commissioned it or whether it's the portrayal of somebody. That there's that interesting like backstory. But I think it's beautiful. Like Andy, you're like well, class.
I really enjoyed it actually because it's really my
I should ask you, how long did it take you to do?
It took about a year.
Was that working kind of like 9 to 5, Monday to Friday?
Yes, it was. And working with the army as well. They had to raise the money, so they did an incredible job themselves.
What a lovely, respectful commission to have as well.
Really was.
And what was it like working with an institution like the army?
I loved it. They're so straightforward. Everything's on the table. If they're having a meeting at 10:34, they have a meeting at 10:34.
Straight on 10:30. No slackers.
no slacking whatsoever. Just say what they're going to do.
No,
and
that's
I
amazing.
just loved every minute of it. I think it was just very, very easy because we all work together as a team. And I find with big commissions very often you're working at odds with the commissioner. Because egos get in the way. And I think if you're commissioning a big piece, you let the artist get on with it because otherwise you end up with what you see as your personal vision, which hasn't got the maturity of 30 odd years of experience behind it.
How did it feel when it was unveiled? Or did you have a ribbon around how
we did everything.
And you have to, okay.
We did everything. We
must
made
have been
it,
so
molded
proud.
it. And then we did the unveiling cloth. Which was difficult because it won't come off. There's too many spikes and bits.
I can imagine.
So we had to make all these special elements with the unveiling so that they all got pulled off at the same time.
It still got stuck.
It only got stuck because the wind was blowing and it blew it into the sculpture. It was a moment of panic. I ran around the front and ripped it off and it was fine.
But that's amazing. But that just shows that if we go all the way back to when you were that young boy, like dabbling with some bits of clay in a stream, and then like fast forward to being able to create something like this, which commemorates, all those men and families involved in these different wars. What a huge achievement. And that's all through your own, like your brain, your hands, practice. And so like anything is possible, like anyone can start anywhere.
It is. And I just think that that's part of the reason why I feel so privileged. I feel so incredibly lucky in my lifetime to have learnt this because it's not taught anymore. And all the aspects that go with it, the moulding, the casting, the new materials that are used, the new principles, new things, like the plasticine that I created to be able to do this in the first place. And as my careers moved on, the companies like Tarantes who sell all the sculptures, they've gone. And so there's no sculpture tools to buy anymore.
That's why it's so important that we keep sculpture going and that we train the next generation of sculptors and and just make it, the aspirational career that, like, for me, like looking back at the Renaissance, 300-400 years ago, that's what so many people wanted to be. They wanted to be sculptors, and then somehow over time people have thought, it's kind of like a luxury to be a sculptor. It's not, it's needed, isn't it? And those skills must be kept going.
Our civilizations are judged by our sculptures.
Absolutely.
More than anything else, because they're the ones that survive. Paintings don't survive. And
also art, and I know this so much from like what I'm studying, but art is how people stay sane, art and culture. We have all the other elements of life, but it's art and culture that help people stay functioning human beings. So it's so important. I'm just going to talk a little bit about my choice here. So mine's, so we've talked about bronze sculptures, haven't we, Andy? Because that's what we do at sculpture school, working clay. So I've just chosen a different medium, and sorry, because I'm a history geek. But so Andy and I, just for listeners, we did a talk recently, didn't we, in January at St Ives School of Painting about sculpture, and we both talked about different figures that we particularly liked in terms of our sculptures. And so I've chosen this lady here, and I'm not going to talk lots about her today, but I'll come back to her at some point in a later podcast. But this is Costanza Bonarelli, and what is so important about this sculpture is she's quite a key figure in history, although she's been a bit of a hidden figure. But so I'm looking in that direction at the sculpture. But this is the only image we have of her. And it's a very, very beautiful marble sculpture of her. And what's lovely about it is that it was carved by her lover at the time, who's a very famous, maybe not so much in England actually, but in Italy, he's like revered. So over here in the UK, I think we focus more on Michelangelo, whereas when I go to Italy, Gian Bernini, who sculpted Costanza here, is very well known. But they had Gian Bernini and Costanza had a very sort of passionate love affair. It was a bit complicated, and I love complicated stories because her husband, so she was in her early 20s here. Her husband was a sculpting apprentice for Gian Bernini. Gian had a big studio in Rome. He was the Pope's favourite sculptor. Had lots of commissions from the Pope. And then, so Costanza began an affair with Gian. And during that affair, this is when he sculpts her. It all goes horribly wrong because Costanza also has a relationship with Gian's brother, who's also a sculptor. Gian finds out, and it ends up in this kind of attack and all sorts of other things that happen, which is not for today's podcast, but for another podcast. But we're so lucky we still have this image of Costanza because there aren't any paintings of her or anything. She's one of my case studies for my PhD. And I just think the sculpture here is beautiful because in the sculpture, and this is where sculpture is so important, because you can include anything. And Gian Bernini included kind of little aspects like her dimples, like a little bit of a double chin. She's got like a little tendril at the back of her neck. Her hair's a bit kind of messy for the style. It's not a formal marble sculpture like many tend to be. Her clothing, not that you can really see it there, but it's kind of quite loose, and there's a button that's undone. It's suggestive that they just had like a passionate clinch together. And it's just lovely because this is a moment in time caught in sculpture. And I think that's why sculpture is so powerful, because again, it's about telling stories. And this is a real story of a woman that without this sculpture I would know nothing about. And you can see this beautiful bust of Costanza at the Bargello Museum in Florence. But that's enough for now. But Andy, before we wrap up, could you just tell us about the beautiful bronze behind you?
Well, my passion for sculpture started with portraiture. And it still is my passion, actually, to get somebody's likeness. It's not just about a technical likeness, like a photographic likeness. It's about capturing their spirit, their soul, if you like. But there are that side of sculpture, the portrait side of sculpture, still fascinates me. And as I've learnt more and more and more about it, there are rules that our faces conform to. They across the board is what I call a generic rules. So if you're at Heathrow Airport, for example, there are thousands of people around you. All those faces that you see work within these confined rules. And because I teach this so much and I'm so interested in it, I wanted to do more ethnic sculptures so that I could see how those rules apply across the world, really, in different races. And we just happened to be having a lovely weekend in Bristol. Went into a shop that was selling Chinese furniture, and there was this beautiful woman in there chatting to us and talking about her furniture. And I came out of the shop and I said to Di, she's beautiful. Would you go back in and ask her if she would sit for a portrait? Because I can't do it. It's the worst chat-up line in the world, isn't it? It sounds sleazy. And so Di popped in, asked her, and she was really, really over the moon about it. So she paid with
come.
Chinese furniture, and I did this portrait of her.
No, because it's stunning.
And she was born in the year of the dragon, which actually was an incredible coincidence because
wasn't it?
I made the dragon before I knew that.
No.
And the idea behind it is that you're not just doing a sculpture.
Yeah.
You're doing something that has this narrative behind it as well.
Yeah.
So the year of her birth, the dragon, was important. And then this sense of bubbles coming up from underneath, which to me were planets, really. It was just another worldly thing, out of worldly thing that I've always been interested in.
And that's really lovely as well, because you had that inspiration from just meeting someone at random and then like just being inspired to want to create.
I love that.
Create her face. Yeah.
I get asked. Go and speak to someone.
Really?
would you be interested in being a model?
It's a bit like being a scout for like a modelling agency, for like a fashion house or something. But no, that's incredible. Well, we're going to leave our first podcast episode here, but thank you both so much. And I can't wait for the next episode when we're going to discuss more about all aspects sculpturally and what you can achieve. But
if anyone is interested in joining us, we have got a special offer on. If you would like to sign up for one of our workshops, we're offering you a 10% discount. So you can either give us a call or go online and use the voucher code TSS10. And you will receive your discount when you book a call.
And Di, what's the website details?
The website is www.thesculptureschool.co.uk.
Okay, brilliant. And can you just tell us finally, what 3 courses have you got coming up? Is there a Taste a Day course?
We've got a Taste a Day course in May, which is a 1-day experience of sculpting. And our next course in April is the animal portrait.
And that's 4 days?
That's a 4-day course. And then in June, May.
And also for anyone that wants to come and do a 4-day course, Di and Andy have some beautiful accommodation that you can also book on site, can't you? There's 2 shepherd's huts and also a gorgeous mezzanine floor. Again, all the details are on the website. So you can have a complete escape from life. Come and sculpt, come and stay, meet the alpacas, have a wonderful time.
Come to our Devon bubble.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Bye.